Hi guys, Asmo here. A few days ago I attended the Path of Exile 2 console playtest organized by GGG, where a lot of the content creators were invited to try out POE 2. After the presentation delivered by Jonathan, the game director for POE 2, I was able to play the couch co-op mode with Aero, a fellow POE content creator, and we had an absolute blast. Neither of us really plays on console, but we still had a great time cracking jokes and exploring the game for many hours. In this video I'm going to give you my first impressions of POE 2, judging the game in the following categories: the couch co-op experience, the console UI, the combat, the bosses, character progression, graphics and environment, sound and music, and the difficulty. And at the end I'm gonna give you my overall impressions as well as mention some of the things that I actually did not like about the game. First, let's talk about the couch co-op mode. Before trying it, I was not excited for it at all, since I am not a console player and I had no idea how that could even work, but I was actually very positively surprised. First of all, the camera and the simultaneous UI usage worked out very well. You can open the passive skill tree or inventory and do whatever you want while your partner continues clearing the monsters or does his own thing with his inventory or passive skill tree. The UI takes less than half of the screen, so you can do it at the same time. And the only limitation is that you cannot really walk too far away from each other. And if you do, the game will attempt to drag the standing player to follow the one that's running away for a bit, but that functionality still needs some work because there is no pathfinding and the standing character gets stuck on the walls. In practice though, this was never an issue. Secondly, because of how the game's combat works, with more intentional and deliberate fights being possible, group play is actually way more fun than in PoE 1, especially when you have only 2 players. I'm sure that with a 6-player party, this will still result in like a clusterfuck of MTX skills covering the whole screen, but at least with 2 players, you can execute very meaningful 2-player combos in a satisfying way. I was playing a monk, focusing on the cold abilities that were freezing and chilling enemies and frontlining, while Aero was playing ranger, focusing on poison skills for maximum DPS. I hold them down and he takes them down, and it worked out like a charm. When we figured out which skills and combos to use, the progression became way easier. You can build actual synergies with your partner in many different and satisfying ways, and that's actually a lot of fun. If one player dies, you have a chance to revive them. However, it requires standing next to their corpse and channeling the revive for a few seconds. The channeling time is long enough that you cannot just do it whenever you want if you're still being attacked, but if you manage to, for example, kite a boss away or crowd control him, it's entirely possible to do it within a boss fight, and it creates all of tension, makes for really cool moments where you can save the encounter by reviving your ally. I really like this system and it felt great in practice. The last console specific thing that I want to talk about is the console UI. It is actually pretty difficult to get it right because you're very limited by the controls. You don't have the freedom of mouse movement and you have way fewer keys that you can use compared to the keyboard. This results in a way more tedious inventory management, and simple tasks like leveling your gems require opening the menu, switching to the right page, and then clicking another button to level the gems. Luckily, you can level all of them at the same time with a single button, but it still takes a while to navigate to the right place where you can do it. One solution that was actually suggested by Nugian was to add a radial menu for the players where they could bind additional actions like leveling the gems, casting a portal, and so on. So hopefully GGG listens to this feedback, because I think that would make the life of console players a lot easier. One part of the console experience that was way better than I expected is the aiming of abilities. You can force turn your character in any direction you want, regardless of the direction of your movement, which we actually had a lot of fun with, just like spinning character around. It's very fun to do while running. But even if you don't do that, the abilities still hit towards the nearest enemies the way you would actually like them to. So most of the time the aim assist was working perfectly well, allowing me to focus a little bit less on the aiming and more on which skill to use, which made the experience more enjoyable. So that was definitely a very nice surprise. Now let's talk about the combat. The combat is actually probably the main difference between PoE 1 and PoE 2. And in my opinion, the way that combat feels in Path of Exile 2 is way better. The combat is more deliberate. There are interesting combos, lots of abilities that interact with each other. Your positioning is more impactful. Everything feels more immersive and real. A lot of people that saw the PoE 2 gameplay footage complained that the game looks too slow. And first of all, we're only comparing the early acts to the end game, which is not a reasonable comparison. But secondly, slowing the game down makes it actually possible to make it way more fun. Because when the game becomes too fast, at some point it stops being interactive. When nothing can hit you and you cannot see what's going on, the game becomes so ridiculous that the only threat to the player can be a bullshit one-shot that comes out of nowhere. And in my entire time of playing PoE 2, I have never experienced a death that seemed out of nowhere or unfair, and you can always see what happened and learn from it to avoid it next time. This makes beating the encounters much more satisfying, and it's a way better way to make a game. The animations are also more varied and much better than in PoE 1, even in the early game when normally attacks and spells feel clunky and slow at first, but when you get more attack and cast speed they become more fun to use. This in PoE 2 will be magnified. Some attacks have many different animations that cycle through them, and they are much more fun to use even from the start. So as you scale up and become faster and more powerful, they also become more powerful and fun and satisfying to use. So I'm very happy with the direction of combat in PoE 2 because it's much richer and polished and fun experience compared to PoE 1. The combos are satisfying to execute, and there is much more variety in the possible playstyles because you can absolutely make a one-button build, but you can also have a lot more other options. The bosses are the absolute cherry on top of the PoE 2 experience. First of all, GGG managed to capture the feeling of anticipation when you approach a boss. The area you traveled from smoothly transitions and you stop seeing monsters and you just know that the boss fight is coming. And this little bit of anticipation, the feeling like some crazy new boss is about to appear, is amazing. There's a huge variety of bosses with incredible themes and designs. Just in the campaign alone, there are so many insanely cool boss fights that this will no doubt contribute to the newer and more casual players enjoying the game more, because right from Act 1 you feel like you're defeating epic enemies, even though they're just different monsters and not necessarily like gods or cosmic beings like from PoE 1. It's still incredibly satisfying and they're very cool. The boss fights themselves feel really good. There were no bullshit attacks that cannot be anticipated, and if you died to something, you could always learn from it and do it better next time. There was one boss, I think the Executioner, and right at the start of the fight, for the first time when I saw him with arrow, he did a massive AoE attack that one-shot us both, and it was absolutely hilarious. We both had really bad gear, but also we didn't know what he's gonna do at first. We came back and smashed him afterwards, but it was still a very memorable experience. There are some unexpected things that can happen in boss fights. Some bosses use the environment or run to a different area, and in general you never know what's coming when you fight a boss for the first time. This makes it just much more fun and much more exciting to meet a new boss. And they're not just like a bigger monster, they have very strong identity and things that distinguish them from other bosses and mobs. There's definitely a lot of creativity put in them, and from what I've encountered in the early acts, the bosses are definitely a strong point of PoE 2, and I would pretty much rate them 10 out of 10. During our playtime, Arrow and me were mostly rushing forward without planning our passes too much, and we left a lot of gear on the ground. This meant that our characters were not as strong as they could have been if we spent more time on upgrading them. Because of that, we could really notice whenever we got an actual upgrade or a bunch of passives from leveling and quests. The Devourer fight in particular, which is analogous to like the Dweller from Act 1, ended up being a little bit too hard for us as a result, so we went back to get an extra level, upgraded our potions, and then we beat the Devourer much easier. This is a very good sign. It means that you have a clear and impactful way of increasing your character power if something becomes too challenging, and that's exactly how ARPGs should work. I cannot speak for the endgame balance, since that's not even a thing yet in PoE 2, but at least for the early campaign, the character progression and the power you get from unlocking extra support gems and getting more gear and passes seems to be working very well. The environments in PoE 2 are truly beautiful. On the technical side, they are almost as good as Diablo 4, but Diablo 4 lighting in many places is nicer in my opinion. I also don't like how everything is a little bit too gray and brown. It gives this kind of boring, filtered look that I think needs to be toned down, at least in some areas, which it may be, but I haven't seen that yet. However, the textures in PoE 2 have a very nice atmospheric quality to them that reminds me of Baldur's Gate 2 actually, with all of the fine details. And if you heard that right, I said Baldur's Gate 2, not Baldur's Gate 3, because I personally prefer the look of Baldur's Gate 2, so I'm a very big fan of how PoE 2 looks like in general, and I think it fits the mood of the game very well. The skill animations and the visuals are also very good, definitely better than in Diablo 4. I think the experience that comes from creating so many skill microtransactions that can change the spells and attacks and how they look has allowed GGG to become very good at making skills look good even in their base forms. So that's definitely top tier quality. The characters in both games, PoE 2 and Diablo 4, look kinda awkward and have this awkward running animations in my personal opinion, but definitely this is much better than PoE 1 1, so this is still a massive step up, and I think this is just a genre-specific thing, because ARPGs don't really focus that much on the character itself. There's no character customization outside of the MTX you can get, and you'll never get the fluid motion cap movement animations like in a Ubisoft game or something like that, because that's not the focus here. But overall, PoE 2 has the look of a AAA game. I think there's lots of creative and beautiful environments that can show it off very well, so I think everybody will be able to appreciate that once the game comes out and they have a chance to play it. On the audio side, the game also delivers on a level of a AAA game. The sound effects are very good, the abilities sound crunchy, but they do have this kind of a muted, overcompressed quality that a lot of modern games have as well. I'm personally a fan of a bit of a bigger range of sounds, but it's not a big issue. The voice acting is also excellent, the characters, the bosses, everyone sounds great, which makes the game more immersive because you're never taken out of the game's world by hearing an actor with a particular accent or something like that. You only hear the character itself, which is really good. And the music is of course excellent, especially for the first time you hear new music in a new zone, and it plays perfectly to the atmosphere of the game. And I'm sure that people will have their favorite game zone just because of the music that plays in it, kind of like in World of Warcraft that has this iconic soundtrack in certain areas. I think the music in PoE 2 is definitely a 10 out of 10. Jonathan Rogers, the game director of PoE 2, spoke numerous times about wanting to make the game challenging. So what did I think of the difficulty? Personally, I don't play with a controller, and I think neither does Arrow, so we were absolute clowns. Instead of attacking, we would press the wrong hotkey and summon a portal or turn off the minimap, and this happened so often that we started calling it the tactical portal. I wasn't used to the movement and the controller or to using all of the buttons, so I was basically playing like a complete noob. I was also undergeared. I didn't know the best abilities, support gems or combos to use. What I'm saying is basically I did everything wrong and the game was still not too difficult. It is very accessible in its current state in my opinion, so if it was up to me, I would make it a little bit more challenging. The reason for that is that there is a completely new axis of balancing the game that PoE 2 is adding. The skill of executing combos and key sequences. There's a big difference between spamming a random skill and utilizing a good combo, and once you find it, you become much stronger. So I think that the game would be definitely way easier once you know what you're doing and either follow a good build or discover one yourself. In Path of Exile 1, players of different skills are separated by their build power that depends on the build choice, the efficiency of their build's construction when it comes to the passives and items, as well as the available currency. A much less significant aspect is their mechanical skill, since it mostly just exists as an ability to run in circles without stopping to never get hit. In PoE 2, there is also the ability to sequence your skills properly, learning and adapting your rotation, and utilizing things like dodge roll animation cancelling in certain situations. If you didn't know, every character comes with a dodge roll ability, and you can use it to cancel any spell or attack animation. I think this will make it harder to find a good balance that allows the weaker players to complete the campaign, while also at the same time not making it trivially easy for the advanced players. Realistically, I think that the top 5% of players will find the game very fun, but also very easy in the campaign, regardless of what Jonathan Rogers claims about the difficulty. Before I give my overall impressions summary, let me talk about a few things that I actually did not like about PoE 2. The first one was the limiting of weapons with innate skills. There are weapons that come with built-in skills that use that skill instead of an attack. I'm not sold on this idea yet, because all I can think of is that I would like to use this weapon in combination with a different attack, or I would like to use this ability with a different weapon. So this seems to be very build restricting, and it doesn't allow for full freedom of choosing how you want to build your character if you're using one of those weapons. I haven't fully explored these weapons yet, but this was just my first impression. The second thing I didn't like were the weapon set passives. The idea is cool, but you get them from early quests at a point where you won't have two good weapons, you won't have two sets of abilities, and you're not playing a real build yet. I think they should move these weapon set passives to the end game, because early on they do more harm than good. It's confusing to pass through the tree with two alternative versions. You have to do extra thinking for deciding which points to take with your regular passives and which to take with your weapon passives to not block yourself, and it just makes your life way harder for no real benefit. Most people I've talked to 2 that played PoE 2 simply did not use them and just played as if the second weapon set didn't exist at all. I was also not a big fan of how the support gems function in PoE 2, and it was actually less intuitive than PoE 1, and the reasoning for the rework was supposed to be making it more accessible and easier to use. The game actually does not indicate clearly enough which supports you can make and why from the uncut gems, and the UI for them was pretty obscure. Neither me nor Aero fully understood why sometimes we could make a support gem and sometimes we couldn't. This system definitely needs some streamlining and more clear indicators about what you can do and what you cannot do. Overall, playing PoE 2 was a very fun experience, and even the console version was a pleasant surprise. If you enjoy playing on a console or using a controller, you're going to have an amazing time. I know that I'm going to have an amazing time playing with a mouse and keyboard as well, because the game is shaping up to be incredibly good. So thank you so much GG for inviting me to the playtest. I'm looking forward to trying the game again in the future, and especially with helping getting the balance of the game right, because I think that might be a very difficult task with the extra skills involved and the extra axis of balancing around different player skill levels. So let me know what are your impressions from what you could see of PoE 2 so far in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.